Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Quick History. Today we're going to be taking a look at David Lloyd George and the liberal reforms. As always, there's a free handout in the description below, and make sure you click on subscribe if you'd like to see more GCSE history based revision content. Let's get into the details. David Lloyd George was one of the most flamboyant characters in British history. He was a future Prime Minister of the country and led Britain during the war with Germany. As well as that, he also was famous for promising that Britain would be a land fit for heroes for the returning soldiers in 1918. However, between 1905 and 1915, the country was run by the Liberal Party, of which David Lloyd George was a member. He was in the Liberal government the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the second most powerful man in the country, and he is responsible for who Britain taxed and for what they spent that tax money on. He is the architect of what we know as the Liberal Reforms, a group of government legislation which were designed to address some of the issues which were raised by Charles Booth, Seaborn Rowntree and Member Reeves. The Liberal Reforms addressed a wide range of issues. Some of the examples of the Liberal Reforms are as follows. In 1906, we have the Workmen's Compensation Act. If a workman had previously been injured at work, they would simply lose their job and not be eligible for any financial compensation. The Workmen's Compensation Act allowed workers to claim compensation if they were injured at work. This was important for two reasons. One, it meant that the people who owned the factories made them much safer, so they wouldn't have to pay any compensation if less people got injured. And two, it allowed workmen who were injured some form of financial security whilst they could recuperate and seek work in the future. We also have, in 1906, the Free School Meal Act. In 1906 it was decided that due to the poverty found by Booth and Rowntree and Member Reeves, it would be a good idea to make sure that children received a good warm meal at school. This is a law that's still in force today. We also have in 1907 the School Inspections Act, which brought doctors and nurses into schools to check children for illnesses. And in 1908 we have the Old Age Pension Act. The Old Age Pension Act provided old age pensioners over the age of 70 with a very modest sum of 5p a week. Whilst not a great deal of money, it provided income for people in their old age and reduced the need for them to work into their older years past the age of 70. The most important Liberal reform, however, was the 1911 National Insurance Act. This National Insurance Act was a pact between the workers, the government and the employers. It worked in a very simple manner. The employer would pay 3p a week into a fund, the employee would pay 4p a week into a fund, and the government would subsidise an additional 2p a week into the fund. This would build up over time, and should a worker ever become ill, then they would be able to claim on the National Insurance Act an income of 50p a week for half of the year for 26 weeks. This was important as it allowed people to get ill through natural causes and not lose income. This was one of the big areas identified by Chadwick in his report, that when people became ill they simply lost their jobs and lost their income. The National Insurance Act prevented this because people paid into the National Insurance Act were able to claim a modest sum to keep them going whilst they recuperated. The Liberal reforms were tremendously controversial. The Conservatives, largely made up of rich landowners, were remarkably concerned that they would be taxed extra money to pay for them. It led to a Parliament Act being passed to force it through the House of Lords. On the other side of the aisle, the Labour Party were tremendously annoyed that people had to pay for their own national insurance. They believed that this should be something provided by the state. This debate would rage on and still continues to rage on today. Join me in the next video where we're going to be taking a look at James Simpson and his work on anaesthetics. I'll see you there.